Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome to Living and Loving Each Day, Bridging Barriers. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I really appreciate you tuning in because we're here to talk about everything that is a barrier for us in our lives. I talk to a lot of parents with children with adaptive needs. I talk to adults with adaptive needs too. And I talk to anybody else who are I find really, I kind of handpick them to say, like, I really like these people because they're inspiring to me and I want to share them with my audience. And today I have a wonderful guest on, and I was on his podcast. I'm very honored to say that I was on his podcast just last week, and so happy to have Michael Hingson here with us today. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Michael, and he will fill you in on the rest because he is amazing with the information that he has. So Michael is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and international lecturer. And he's blind since birth. And he also survived the 9/11 attacks with the help of his guide dog, Roselle. So this story of teamwork and his indomitable will to live and thrive is the subject of his best-selling. I'm not sure if it's still out, if it's out just now or if it's coming out really shortly. And the book is called Thunder Dog. Oh, I know. You've got a new book, Michael, coming out calling Be Like a Guide Dog. We'll talk about that later too. So this book is called Thunder Dog, but he also gives hundreds of presentations around the world each year and just speaking to influential groups. And some of those groups are ExxonMobil, AT&T, Federal Express, Scripps College, Rutgers University, Children's Hospital, and the American Red Cross, just to name a few. So in the program notes, you will see his information about his webpage and to see more about his talks. And I've watched some of his YouTube videos on how he grabs an audience, and he's a very funny guy. So I really am proud to have Michael with us here today. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Living and Loving Each Day.
Honor to be here. Thanks very much for having us.
Thank you so much. So we want to know, I know the audience wants to know a little bit about you first, because you've already bridged a ton of barriers. And we want to know, we're going to kind of touch on two things: your story and how you're doing what you're doing, and then also about the new definition of the word disability. I wouldn't mind tackling that as well after. So you go right ahead. I'm going to highlight you and take it away, Mike.
Well, as you said, I have been blind my entire life. And when I was born 2 months premature and put in an incubator with a pure oxygen environment. And I was one of those who ended up being um, a victim, if you will, of what was called at the time retrolental fibroplasia, which is now called retinopathy or prematurity. But the bottom line is retina didn't develop properly because even too much oxygen isn't necessarily a good thing for everyone.
Wow.
And so the result was that I became blind. The doctors, when it was discovered, I was about 4 months old. The doctors told my parents to send me off to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to do anything in the world, and I would just be a drain on the family. And my parents said, "No, you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He can grow up and do whatever he chooses." And so the bottom line is that they brought me up with that attitude. And
Good.
so and so I went off and went to school, went to public school, went to high school. I got a guide dog when I went to high school. Along the way, I joined the Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts of America and Vigil in the Order of the Arrow, which is the highest rank in the Boy Scout Honor Society Order of the Arrow. My father and I both got ham radio licenses at the same time. He was an electronics and electrical engineer, but he didn't want to get his license until I could get mine so that we could work together, which I thought was pretty interesting and sign of a good parent, right? And
Yeah, of
so we got
course.
our licenses at the same time. I went to college. I got a master's degree in physics from the University of California at Irvine and a secondary teaching credential. And along the way in college, I started meeting other blind people because I joined an organization called the National Federation of the Blind, which is the largest organization of blind consumers in the country and, in fact, in the world.
Wow.
And so I joined that. I've been very involved in a lot of legislative efforts with that organization and learned a lot about other things relating to blindness and so on. But the bottom line is what I really learned is that blindness isn't the problem. It's people's attitudes and
Yes.
misconceptions about blindness. Even some of the organizations relating to blindness are part of the problem.
Yes.
Um, and they don't really tend to deal with blindness appropriately. They're victims, if you will, or promulgators of societal attitudes rather than recognizing that blind people can really grow up to do whatever they want to do and that society should give us that opportunity.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's amazing. What was the hardest thing for you to just that you felt was the biggest obstacle?
Well, it's changed over time. It certainly was more of a challenge years ago to travel because I didn't have a lot of the information that we have today to as easily travel around. But I think the largest problem overall still was and is societal attitudes. I went
Right.
on an airplane once and they wouldn't let me on the plane because I didn't want to sit in the very front row of the airplane. It's a dangerous place. People with guide dogs ought not to sit in the front row. Why? Because it's a bulkhead row, and if you sit in the bulkhead row, there is nothing to prevent your dog from bouncing around if there are air turbulence. So I
Wow.
love to sit in anything but the bulkhead row because the dog goes under the seat in front of me, which is what the dog should do. And so if there's turbulence, the dog won't bounce around. And we're seeing more and more situations where passengers and flight crews and so on are being buffeted around because of turbulence and so on. Well,
Mm,
that's just as likely, if not more so, for a guide dog that's sitting at my feet if I don't have a way to keep the dog completely restrained, which is what sitting in a non bulkhead or not in the front row is all about because the dog goes under the seat in front of me. It is
right.
very comfortable. Thank you very much.
Well, and I'm so glad that you're there to tell them this. We've got to, it's like you have to educate people.
But
That's
they
the,
don't. But they don't listen because
no,
there are just so many people. They, oh, but the dog has more room in the bulkhead. Well, not really. But that's not the point. It's
yeah,
not safe.
exactly. It's a lot of, I'm finding that as a special ed teacher and as a realtor who deals with accessibility and mobility issues and a grandmother of a little girl who had near SIDS. I mean, we're always, isn't, and I'm not, I'm the secondary person here. I'm not where you are firsthand experiencing this, but I see it secondhand where I always jump in and explain things. It's like you're explaining all the time people, but at least I think a lot of the people I do talk to, they are, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing. So it is,
Hmm.
at least we're out there. That's why this podcast is here. We want to say, listen, this is what's going on, and this is what you need to know to get along in the world,
Hmm.
to be kind to everybody, regardless of, you know, we all have limitations. So it's just, shows differently.
I think the important thing is that people need to stop making assumptions. And you mentioned earlier about um, my view of disabilities. And so let me tell you about that. I
Good.
was in a hotel room last year, actually in a hotel a year ago, March. And I was there with my niece and nephew, and we were walking down the main staircase from the third floor. So there was a lot of light. It was all open all the way down to the lobby. And as we were going down the stairs, suddenly I heard people screaming and yelling. And I asked my niece, "What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, we just lost power to the hotel and to the area surrounding us." She could see all that because she could see all the way down into the lobby. Now, this was 3 in the afternoon, so there was plenty of sunlight, but still, suddenly people weren't comfortable because we lost power and they didn't have all the light that they wanted to have. And so the result was people started panicking, running around looking for flashlights and smartphones and all that sort of stuff. Well, I appreciate that. But the issue is that I realized out of that, we have the wrong definition of what a disability is. First of all, a disability is not a lack of ability. Now,
Right.
my diversity friends tell me that it is because it starts with dis. And I say, no, that has nothing to do with it because because you've got words like discern, discrete, disciple. Those all start with dis. They're not negative. No,
Right.
disability is not a lack of ability. That's what you want it to be, but you're wrong. That is not what we ought to be viewing it as. The reality is that a disability is a characteristic that every single person on the planet has. Why do I say that? Well, when I observed all those people running around, I realized that Thomas Edison in 1878 invented the electric light bulb. What
Mhm.
is the what is the electric light bulb, if you will, um, viewing it from the standpoint of the Americans with Disabilities Act? The light bulb is simply a reasonable accommodation to help light dependent people be able to see in the dark.
Right.
So all of you people who have eyesight are light dependent. You don't do well without light. That doesn't mean that you are less able than
Right.
I, even though I don't care whether the lights
Yeah.
are on or not.
Right.
There
And
are
you don't go
more
crazy when they go off.
there are more of you than there are of me, and so the result is that the mostly all pervasive theory is, well, if you're light independent, then you're less than the rest of us. Well, it's not true. Because the reality is I was able to continue walking down those stairs just fine. I'm able to function without having lights on,
Mm,
but I also understand that there are a lot of people who need to have light. So the reality is that disability is really a characteristic that every single person has, except it manifests itself differently for different people. But don't say that it makes one group of people better than another.
exactly. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, and we got to get that out there, that word out there. I noticed my daughter mentioned to me one day that somebody was saying, because Kalea, my granddaughter, was in a wheelchair, and then somebody came up and knelt beside her and said, "Well, what's wrong with her?" To Candace, and Candace says, "There's nothing wrong with her. Like she has cerebral palsy and she doesn't walk like you walk, but there's nothing." So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm so glad that there's well-spoken people like you who could really help people understand this. This is important.
My wife was in a wheelchair her whole life,
Mhm.
and she experienced lots of challenges because people. We went to when we would go to Disneyland. If it was crowded, people would just jump over her footrest to try to get a shortcut to go somewhere.
Oh my
You know,
gosh,
that's the kind of thing people do. They're inconsiderate.
inconsiderate. Yeah, they don't think, and that's why it's important to let just the awareness, self-awareness, and the awareness of others is so important. Just to let people know. Yeah.
Sure.
Wow. So tell me what I know you've got your book, the second book about Be Like a Guide Dog, it's called, or
Well,
Act. Tell me
so
about that.
so the first book is Thunderdog, the story
Okay.
of a blind man, his guide dog, and the triumph of trust at Ground Zero. And we published that in 2011. It became a New York Times bestseller, and it's mainly about the World Trade Center and what happened to me that day, along with lessons that I learned in life that helped me be able to function as I was escaping from the World Trade Center. And why was I in the World Trade Center? I worked there. I
Yeah.
had a I had a job there, and so I worked on the 78th floor. I had been hired to open an office, and I did on the 78th floor of Tower One. So anyway, Thunderdog is about that. In 2013, we wrote a children's book called Running with Roselle, which is really more about me growing up and Roselle growing up, and then um, us meeting. And there's a little bit about the World Trade Center, but it's mainly about our lives, and it's to educate people about guide dogs and a little bit more about blindness. Then, when the pandemic hit in 2020, I realized that I had been talking by that time for 19 years about the fact that I escaped the World Trade Center. I was able to do it in a calm way, but I have never taught other people how they could learn to control their fear and
Mm,
not let it, as I put it, blind you or overwhelm you, but rather you can use fear as a very powerful tool to help you focus and do whatever you want to do. But you have to train yourself to do that. And that was something that I had done along the way. Well, I don't know that I necessarily intended it, but it worked out that way.
yeah.
It worked out that way. And so the result was, though, that I realized that I ought to teach that to people. So
Yes.
started started working on it, and worked with a colleague, Carrie Wyatt Kent, and we wrote this book, Live Like a Guide Dog: True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs About Being Brave, Overcoming Adversity, and Moving Forward in Faith. And the idea is I learned most of how to behave in a lot of ways in life from working with 8 guide dogs, and then then my wife's service dog, Fantasia. And the issue is that dogs can teach us so much if we allow it. For
Hmm.
example, we have now had a political election. Donald Trump was elected president. There are a lot of people that are going crazy. What's going to happen? This, that, and the other stuff. And the reality is that they're worried about all sorts of things over which they do not have any control. The
Right.
election is over. We have a
Hmm.
president.
Hmm.
The election is over. We have a president. And so the issue is, um, what we have to focus on are the things that we can control and don't worry about the rest. And that's something I've talked about ever since September 11th. But the other part of it is that while people are worried about all these things, they're what ifing everything. What if this happens? What if that happens? How much control do you have over what if this happens or what if that happens? You don't, because it's
Zero.
something
Yeah,
because
zero.
it's so-
Yeah.
because it's something else that other people have control over, namely the president and so on. But there are things that we do have control over. And if we would focus on those and stop worrying about all the things over which we don't have control, then we would, in reality, be a lot more focused, a lot more calm, and we would live much better lives. And so Live Like a Guide Dog is all about using the lessons that I learned from 9 dogs altogether to talk about how to learn to control fear and make it a powerful motivator and a powerful reinforcer in your life rather than something that overwhelms you and makes you incapable of making decisions.
Freezing, right? It's a flight or fright, or flight or freeze, freeze or flight. No,
Fight or fright.
fight or
And
flight, fight or flight.
the issue is, um, people say these are natural responses. Well, they are, but you can learn to control so many things in your life. And
Hmm.
there are things that we talk about, like introspection, learning about how to analyze what happened to you today. What worked? What didn't work? Why didn't something work the way you expected it to? What are you afraid of? What concerns you? Those are all questions that you can ask yourself every night while you're falling asleep and really analyze your day, for example. And that's just something that unfortunately people don't do nearly enough of. They
Hmm.
don't really go into doing self introspective sorts of things. So they're not learning what they really need to learn and learning how to exercise and develop that mind muscle.
Mm. That self-awareness is so important, and just because you can take action, and you can take action to make it better. And like you do, like, I mean, you're amazing. Like, you do so many things in your job, just in your work, in your writing, your keynote speaking, your what else are you doing? You're doing some other things, I think, on your website I saw.
Well, we're doing the podcast. I
Oh yeah.
speak. I
Yes.
speak. I write. I'm a ham radio operator still.
Good.
I collect old radio shows and love to listen to them as a hobby.
Oh,
Um, but I travel and speak and travel all over the place.
nice. Oh, that's amazing. Well, Mike, I want to thank you. So we're already at 18 minutes. I do I don't edit. Like, I'm not like you. I don't put together a whole, I just have a wonderful conversation. And then I put it out there. We put it out live. But I
Well,
want to thank you.
and I do as well.
You do.
I want
Yeah.
to read something to you to end the podcast, if I might.
Sure. Yes,
This
please.
comes from a banquet address delivered at the 1956 convention of the National Federation of the Blind. It was delivered by the president of the federation, Jacobus Tembrook.
Okay.
Tembrook went to Berkeley, got a bachelor's in psychology, and then wanted to go into constitutional law or into law. The people at Berkeley said, no, you can't do that. Blind people can't do law. So he ended up getting a PhD in psychology, and then he went to work at the university teaching.
Hmm.
And along the way, they liked what he was doing so well that they actually made him chair of the speech department because he was also a very good speaker. But when
Hmm.
he became chair of the speech department, he announced to the campus, anyone who wants to join this department, there's one basic condition that you have to deal with, and that is that if you're going to join this department, you have to undertake a discipline outside of your standard academic discipline that you got your degrees in. So,
Oh.
for example,
Hmm.
what do you think Tembrook decided to do with his academic discipline outside of psychology?
I don't know.
Law.
Oh, cool.
So he studied law, and he actually became one of the foremost constitutional law scholars of the 1940s, 50s, and into the 60s.
Wow.
He also helped form the National Federation of the Blind. And in 56, he gave a speech at the banquet entitled Within the Grace of God. And we talk about disability, so I want to read the last two paragraphs of that to you. And this
Okay.
also, by the way, answers another question. You can see the Braille dots on my little Braille Edge
Ah,
device
yes.
here. So I'm going to read this to you,
Okay.
and it goes like this. In the 16th century, John Bradford made a famous remark which has ever since been held up to us as a model of Christian humility and correct charity, and which you saw reflected in the agency quotations I described earlier. Seeing a beggar in his rags creeping along a wall through a flash of lightning in a stormy night, Bradford said, "But for the grace of God, there go I."
Mm.
Compassion was shown, pity was shown. I lost my place.
Oh, that's okay. Well,
Charity was shown,
mhm,
humility was shown. There was even an acknowledgement that the relative positions of the two could and might have been switched. Yet, despite the compassion, despite the pity, despite the charity, despite the humility, how insufferably arrogant. There was still an unbridgeable gulf between Bradford and the beggar. They were not one, but two. Whatever might have been, Bradford thought himself Bradford and the beggar a beggar. One high, the other low. One wise, the other misguided. One strong, the other weak. One virtuous, the other depraved. We do not and cannot take the Bradford approach, although that is, we do not and cannot take the Bradford approach. It is not just that beggary is the badge of our past and is still all too often the present symbol of social attitude toward us, although that is at least a part of it.
mhm,
But in the broader sense, we are that beggar, and he is each of us.
mm,
We are made in the same image and out of the same ingredients. We have the same weaknesses, strengths, the same feelings, emotions, and drives,
mhm,
and we are the product of the same environmental, social, and economic and other environmental forces. How much more consonant with the facts of individual and social life, how much more a part of a true humanity to say instead, there within the grace of God, do go I.
mm. Wow. That
And
that's yeah, you go ahead. That's powerful. Thank you. Thank
well,
you.
and I think that's so important
Mhm,
because it's true. We've got to stop deciding that, well, except for God's grace, I could be that person.
mm,
Well, the reality is that you have no idea, and God gave all of us gifts.
mhm,
Disability is a gift in a way. As I
mhm.
said earlier, every person has a disability. It manifests itself differently for different people, but it doesn't change the fact that we're all part of the same world. We come from the same environment. And the fact of the matter is that we all have gifts, strengths, and weaknesses, and we should acknowledge that.
Yeah, it's so true. What a wonderful way to end the podcast. Mike, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Do you call that the Bradford talk, or is there a name? Like,
Well, the
what?
banquet speech is called Within the Grace of God.
Okay, within the grace of
and
God. Okay.
and if you want to see the whole speech, you can go to the National Federation of the Blind website www.nfb.org, and you can actually find the whole speech in their
Mm.
materials section.
Oh, thank you for that. That's wonderful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. You got a treat because Michael is here, and I'm just so pleased that he joined us and shared with us just a little bit. Just this is just a glimpse into him. He's a wonderful man, and you do have to check out his website. It'll be in the show notes, and his email address as well. So if you have any questions for him, and
Well,
I
and
just
and of course, if anybody's looking for a speaker, that's what I do. I'm always looking for speaking opportunities. They
yes.
can find me. They can email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So if you're looking for a speaker, and I've seen your long speeches, and you do pull off some pretty funny things in there. So everyone, he really enjoys them. He's very easy to listen to, and as you could hear today, a wonderful orator. So again, Mike, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor and a privilege to have you with us today. And again, Sue Jansen is my name. And if you have want to subscribe and follow and have any questions or any comments, I would love to hear from you. So just go to suejansen.ca. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Michael, you're a pleasure. I hope that we can do this again sometime really soon.
Let's do it. Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
let's do it. Thank you so much. Okay, goodbye, everybody.